from the School of Information Science and Learning Technologies at the University of Missouri. Welcome to Task Analysis. This course is an introduction to task analysis. The most common instructional design model is called the ADDIE model. It's a simple acronym for Analysis, Design, Development, Implementation, and Evaluation. Task analysis is one component or one method of performing analysis at the beginning of a learning design process, and it's the most common method. What's important to note is that task analysis is just one of many analysis methods. So analysis is also called front-end analysis and includes a number of components, including needs assessment, learning and task analysis, contextual analysis, and learner analysis. Task analysis is the analysis process is really assessing what a learner needs to know. So that's what needs assessment is. And then based on this needs assessment, we assess various tasks for design and development. Occasionally we engage contextual analysis. So for example, this is really common in unstructured work environments where understanding if there are things that are outside of an individual's knowledge that are leading to performance difficulties, contextual analysis is more likely. This course is focused on learning and task analysis. So there are these other components of front-end analysis that aren't covered in this course, but are covered in other specific courses. So needs assessment is needed when at the process at the very beginning. So needs assessment is often precipitated, as I mentioned or alluded to a moment ago, by a performance problem of some kind. This can be a deficit of skills or knowledge, motivation or incentive, or perhaps a structural challenge within an organization. The actual performance defects and what's causing them is an important component of what's assessed with needs assessment. And sometimes these performance issues are caused by the introduction of a new system or can be resolved through the introduction of a new system. And needs assessment is so critical that it's covered in course 9474 in the ISLT curriculum and won't be covered in depth here. These are some additional needs assessment methods, and these slides are available in your course materials. So the purpose of task analysis is that once we've identified a need, then we want to try to determine what the goals and objectives of the learning are. So there's some kind of gap in what people know, and we need to close that gap. So these components could be jobs, skills, or objectives. And really what we're trying to think about is how do we need people to think? And this is the primary rationale for conducting task analysis, is really breaking down and decomposing how we need people to think during the performance of work. And if you're not able to identify how learners are supposed to think and perform, then it's unlikely, and I think David Jonasson would have used stronger language, but it's unlikely that you'll be successful in the performance of your task analysis. So the goals and objectives of learning are determined at the beginning, and then the operational components of jobs, skills, objectives, and what the performers do and think are done. And what the key is that at the very end here, how to conduct the performance assessments is part of the task analysis before you actually design the learning intervention, because we want to measure whether or not the objectives were achieved, going back to the original purpose, not having those objectives or evaluations being built out of the resulting instructional design. We don't want to teach to the test. As it were. There are certain assumptions in task analysis. If you don't know how learners are supposed to perform, then it's really difficult to effectively design instruction. And so task analysis is essential for good instructional design. And task analysis is is probably the least understood component of instructional design because, frankly, it's not taught very well and it's not taught in very many different places. So there are few courses like this in the world, and you have the advantage of actually having a course in task analysis, which is a critical instructional design skill to develop. A lot of people today think that perhaps we don't even need to think, we don't even need to teach instructional design because so much of what happens occurs in a context and can't be broken down in a structured way, which seems like one of the things that you would do with task analysis. My argument in the other direction would be that if you're going to have people understand how work occurs, and if you're going to choose to break the rules of doing a detailed task analysis because it's the task that you're trying to teach is so deeply contextualized in a situation, for example, that might not be sequential. It's important to understand the rules of task analysis so that you can break them appropriately. So adding on to that, most designers rely on a single method, which is procedural analysis. And if you rely on just that one method, every design that you do is going to be procedural in nature. And if you think about it, that's not really as effective as using multiple methods, especially using the methods appropriate to a particular learning task. So different tasks and contexts require different methods of task analysis. And what's key is to not fall in the trap of thinking that one size fits all. And the size that folks fall into the trap of thinking it fits all is usually procedural analysis. So the functions of task analysis, in the introductory chapter in the course content side, there are various functions of task analysis that are described, including inventorying specific skills and tasks. So, for example, an accountant might perform hundreds of different tasks in the course of their job. And this part of it, this inventorying of tasks, does overlap somewhat with the needs analysis component of instructional design. But there may be only one or two tasks that the accountant performs that are leading to a particular performance issue in the workplace. So the key next step is then selecting which tasks you're going to develop instructional design for. You wouldn't want to try to do everything. You don't need to teach someone something that's already working effectively. And then decompose those tasks and identify learning outcomes for the various decomposed tasks, and after which we sequence them. We sequence the learning. And this is important because you want the instructional design that results to be coherent and consistent with the tasks being performed. And so thinking about how we sequence them is a really important skill in the performance of task analysis. Finally, this allows us to classify learning outcomes, which, of course, as I just mentioned, classifying the learning outcomes is an important part of identifying what we expect to be different in the resulting behaviors and thinking of the people who go through the instructions that we design. This is from the book. We're not going to cover all of the chapters in the book, and it's not a required book. The chapters will be shared with you as they are in this module in Blackboard. But this just gives you an idea of how things can be sequenced in sort of a broad spread of the components of task analysis. And as I mentioned, there are many different kinds of task analysis, and not all of them will be covered. So the kinds of task analysis can also be conceptualized this way. So the most common is job or procedure analysis. The second most common is learning analysis. So we'll do one of these in this course. Called prerequisite analysis, and we'll look at how the sequence in which we ought to learn affects certain activities. Cognitive task analysis focuses on the thinking required to perform work. So some work is actually requires thinking and is more thought-oriented, and some work is more action-oriented. And so obviously the cognitive task analysis is going to be more appropriate for the thinking kinds of jobs. Activity analysis is what we're going to do here is look at how people actually function in the real world. So not how we think they should function or do function, but how they actually do function. So one approach is to carefully study skilled practitioners and then use what we learn to design instruction for novice practitioners. Subject matter analysis or content is the final one. And this is not the most effective way to teach, frankly, but it is the coin of the realm in formal and traditional education, including the university. And so understanding how to analyze and do subject matter content analysis is also an important dimension of task analysis. Procedural analysis methods will be covered. In short, it's focused only on the procedures and processes. And as I mentioned earlier, so knowing how to do procedural analysis and job analysis is important, but it's also important that this not be the only way that you perform task analysis. Learning analysis is a method, and the point here is that there are around 50 different documented methods for conducting task analysis. In a single course, we won't be able to cover all of them, but learning the classification of learning analysis kinds of task analysis will be covered in some small way. Cognitive task analysis, there are a number of the most powerful and popular models for cognitive task analysis. This includes the GOMS model, goals, operators, methods, and selection, the Perry model, prediction, action, results, and interpretation, also DNA, decompose, network, and assess, cognitive simulations, and case-based reasoning. And case-based reasoning is actually a very powerful method for identifying stories. And stories, we will see, are a far more effective method for designing instruction than sequential or procedural methods. People remember stories, and so they're very effective in the design of instruction. A final method, one that is a component of much of the work I've done over the years in both industry and academia, is activity analysis, which is actually studying the ways that people perform their jobs while they're doing them. And this is informed by activity theory, which emerges from the Russian educational philosopher Vygotsky. We'll also do syntactic analysis, which looks at language, critical incident, or critical decision methods. These are methods where we look at where things went wrong. So one of the projects I have right now is I'm looking at the internal communication at Boeing related to the 787 battery design, and that's a critical incident approach where we're trying to identify what went wrong around a critical incident. And then there's also task knowledge structures, which is another form of looking at what are the structures of knowledge needed to perform a task. Subject matter content analysis, there's ways of doing things like conceptual graph analysis, a master design chart. If you can imagine, all of these methods kind of surround identifying an inventory of the subject matter that needs to be taught and a sequence and structure to the order in which one might teach the content, particularly paying attention to critical dependencies and knowledge across a subject matter. And finally, the course model of task analysis really looks at courses organized by tasks, subject matter, content, or problems. And these are different ways that courses can be designed, and we'll talk a little bit about this later on in the course. Once again, welcome to task analysis. I look forward to working with you online, and all of my contact information is in the syllabus, and I will see you online.